joining us today. We're here to talk about the mismanagement of the coronavirus crisis on the federal and state levels, particularly as it relates to opening schools too early. What we're going to do here is have a roundtable discussion, and then we will have a question and answer section where you can ask questions to the speakers. To do that, you're going to type it into the message box and we'll read it out loud in the order that they're received. With that being said, I'll pass it over to Mike Collier. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Avi. Well, thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you joining us, and it's a pleasure for us to be here. You have four folks that are going to speak to you with varying points of view about a common concern that we have, which is, are we going to be opening our schools safely? And I'm coming to you in my capacity as a senior advisor for the Biden campaign here in Texas, also a public education advocate. And I would just like to start by saying that as you zoom around the state and talk to people about this very important issue, some folks really want to get back to school. Some folks are afraid to go back to school. Some teachers really want to get back in the classroom. Some teachers are afraid to go back in the classroom. That's normal. The question is, how do we manage through this so that we can teach our children and do it safely? And what we've learned from the opening of the Texas economy, so this goes back in May, that if you don't do it right, if you succumb to political pressure, people die. And in this case, children could die and their parents. And we also know that COVID is striking minority communities disproportionately. And so that's very real. And the other thing we've seen is that incompetence kills. And so this is really serious, which is why we're having this conversation. And so I think what I'd like to do is ask each of our panelists. So we have Bridget Mathis from Fort Worth, who's a teacher. We have Selena Montoya from San Antonio, who is running for a House district. And we have Danny Norris, who's very well known in the community, sits on the Harris County Board of Education. And so rather than provide the detailed introduction, why don't we have you all each do that? I'm going to do it in order that I see you on the screen. Bridget, why don't we start with you, if you'd introduce yourself kindly.
Thank you so much. I'm Bridget Mathis. This is year 22 for me in Fort Worth ISD. I'm a proud educator. My mother was a 42-year educator in Fort Worth ISD. So education has always been a part of my DNA. I'm currently the Abbott coordinator at Oscar Dean White High School, which I'm so proud to say is the high school where I graduated from. So I've come full circle from a student now to a coordinator at the same high school. And it is totally a pleasure to be on this roundtable to give you the perspective as from a teacher's standpoint of what we see, how we feel, and what we believe must happen for us to re-enter into school safely in the state of Texas.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you.
Selena?
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Selena Montoya, and I'm so proud to be able to bring the perspective, not only as someone who's a candidate hoping to serve in the state house and the effect that has on our public schools, but also as a parent of school-age children who attend our public schools. I'm someone who has spent a lot of my time as a professional working in public schools in an effort to ensure that children are reading at grade level. And we saw in the recent stay-at-home orders starting in May that we were alleviated of the need to take the STAR standardized testing, which is usually utilized in third grade to help measure those reading scores and those reading standards. And what that tells me is that, we're going to have to work harder than ever to ensure that parents, teachers, and schools have the resources they need to meet the needs of our students. My daughter is getting ready to enter the 4th grade in a dual language program, which, is its own set of unique circumstances. And I have a son who's getting ready to start kindergarten. So the perspective that I bring, I hope, is one that gives a little bit of perspective from the parent side, but also from a policy side of someone who's working to ensure that early childhood education is of high quality, that public school education is equitably funded, and that when we look at school opening as a whole, that we're not just considering the students and the parents, but we're looking at those people, the administrators, the custodial staff, the teachers and the assistants and the student teachers who find themselves in a situation that none of them anticipated. obviously they did not go into this profession to make money. They went into it to mold young minds and prepare for the future. It's the least we can do to make sure that it's a safe environment for them to do so.
Thank you, Selena. Danny?
So I'm Danny Norris. I am a trustee and vice president for the board for the Harris County Department of Education. We are the last county school board in the state, for those who are not familiar. So we, all the independent school districts are independent of the county school districts, which are the original school districts. So we're the last one in the state of Texas. I serve in that capacity and as a educator from the last 11 years. I was teaching on law school level, but between undergrad and law school, actually, I taught and I did some teaching up in Arlington, Texas. So as a perspective of both a former teacher, educator, a member of the local school board, and as a parent, also a parent of two children who are in public schools, I am definitely concerned on a lot of levels and what needs to be done. And I think there's a lot of work to do. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, both as an educator and as a lawyer too, because as a lawyer, I get a lot of questions on wills and other things like that are all related to this particular pandemic. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm trying to do my part. So
thank you, Danny. Selena, Bridget, let's walk through some questions. And I'd like, if I may, to start with tone at the top. Now, if you look at Pew Research, they'll tell you that a very large number of Texans, Americans, get substantially all of their information about COVID from our president. And our president has recently said that children are immune. He's also recently said that children do not transmit the disease. He said that. Now, if you look at the American Academy of Pediatricians, they will tell you that is not true. In fact, recently, we learned of 380,000 infected children, 9% of the total infections. And the infection rate among children has grown 90% just in a month. So this isn't true, but people believe that it's true. And they are putting pressure, and I know this because I talk to school board trustees, and I believe in local control, but their constituents who are not properly informed are putting pressure on their school board to do the wrong thing. And it creates a very, very dangerous situation. So Danny, you're a community leader, and your leadership in the community is as an elected official and many of the things that you've done. How do you react to this tone at the top crisis?
It's a major problem. I think the biggest issue is that it has, the biggest issue in general is that the lack of seriousness of addressing it. And I think the initial tone of it's not going to be that bad, it's going to go away. Some of those talking points that he had early on made people not serious about it. So I mean, we have people, you see, I see on my social media people who are still gathering in large gatherings with no mask. You still even when you drive around town, you see people who are not abiding by the masks. So the lack of seriousness of it from the beginning has made it where a lot of people think, well, this must not be that bad. It's just the flu. I've had the flu. It can't be that bad. And that's a whole different mindset. So, and with regards to being an elected official, it's made it, the biggest thing that we had to do is just get very nimble. We've had to make sure that we have had to have a number of special meetings to make sure that we're able to address, funding for different initiatives that we're doing. We recently, in our department, we're doing foundations. One of the biggest issues on the school level is that when you're going remote, everybody does not have access to online or even the internet sometimes. So make sure that students are able to actually have access, especially this, I think in the spring, it wasn't as big an issue because I think for the most part, teachers were more flexible, but I know this upcoming year, for those who are going to be online, they're going to get graded as if they're in class. So it's very critical that if any students are not going to be there in person, they're going to have the technology to make sure they're able to get their assignments. So making sure the students are able to get that. I know Harris County, our county commissioner court just, I think yesterday, or the other day, just approved an initiative to give hotspots and computers out to students, but more like that. We need as much as we can to bridge the digital divide, to make sure that we have, I think, the least amount of students in the classrooms as possible, to make sure that those who do actually attend are able to spread out and socially distance as much as possible. But I think right now, as a board member, it's really just a matter of making sure that we're able to respond and make sure that we're able to pretty much react very quickly. But the big issue, to your original point, is the tone has to be completely different. We have to take this very serious. I think especially now that students are going back to school, with the ability to transmit it very quickly throughout the communities, it's going to have to be the tone has to be on all levels, has to be a very serious nature. So we have this under control, and right now it's not under control. So we have to all take it seriously. And that's not being translated at the top at all right now.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Bridget, I want to come to you as a follow-on to that. I think we all know that Vice President Biden has already put out a plan and has offered it up to the Trump administration on how to open schools safely, which we'll talk about in a minute. But a part of that plan is consistent guidance from the CDC, because school board members need expert advice. Now, there's a dynamic playing out in Texas, and this is Governor Abbott, where at first he was saying, I want school boards to make these decisions. And now what he's saying to us is that school boards make those decisions, and they cannot be overruled by local health authorities. And Bridget, that's what I'd like to hear your point of view on, because my point of view is that the local health authorities know what they're doing. And they ought to have a say in this. And when things are running properly, like when we have a hurricane, for example, in Houston, all of the leaders from the different points of view, they get together, they come to a commonality, and then they come at us directly together. Here, they've set us up where you have a health authority versus school board, and it creates enormous confusion and dissonance. And if you're a teacher, and if you're an administrator, and you're trying to figure out, Bridget, who's got decision rights and who should I listen to and who I trust, how on earth do you deal with this?
So, good question. First of all, as any teacher knows, and what we teach all our teachers and student teachers, and what we give teachers time each day, is for planning. And when we do planning, education is data driven. We are driven by data, we're driven by scores, we're driven by everything. That kind of decides the direction in which you're going to take the way you're going to teach. It's going to take in which the direction each school is going by the data. So as educators, we are taught to use data. And we say, a lot of them say, data is your best friend. So if data is my best friend, the data states that in the state of Texas, as of yesterday, we're at a 24% positivity rate. And if that doesn't drive us to thinking outside the box and saying that we're not ready yet for in-person schooling, I don't know what other data we need to use. And I don't know what other type of preparation we need to be. I compare Texas all the time, since I had a lot of time off, doing research. I look at New York, the state of New York, and they're ready to do in-person learning in September. But right now they're sitting at a 1% positivity rate. So somewhere down the line, New York prepared for school reopening early, and they did what they needed to do in preparation so they could do that. We are not prepared as a nation, and we're definitely not prepared in the state of Texas. We have to give control to our school board based on the county's health department. And I do understand Texas is a large state and each county is going to be different. And that's why the data should drive each county based on their health department. Tarrant County right now is sitting at 11% positivity rate as of yesterday. We're nowhere near ready to start in-person school, but yet and still there are some schools that started in person. Dallas County the same way. And so unless we go by what the scientists are saying, people who we entrust, I'm not a science teacher. And I tell kids that all the time. I'm not a math teacher. I tell them I don't do X, Y's, and Z's. I'm more of a metaphor and simile type girl. So that means I stay in my lane, but I go to science or a math teacher when I have that issue or that problem that I don't understand. So I'm not understanding why our governor and lieutenant governor and our TEA commissioner has tied all this into, and it's all basically, and I'm just going to be honest, about funding. It's about the money.
Right.
And it's so, but as teachers, we believe that the data tells us that our lives are worth more than a federal dollar.
Thank you, Bridget. It's a great segue into money. Selena, I'm going to come to you, but before we leave the idea of planning, I just want the record to reflect that at the very beginning of this crisis, Vice President Biden offered his plan to President Trump. And since then, we've had more than 100,000 people die because that plan wasn't implemented. There is no plan. Now we're on the cusp of opening schools, in my opinion, without a plan. Vice President Biden has offered his plan. He's not holding it, to try to get elected on it. He wants Donald Trump to implement this plan. And the saddest part of all is we suffer, and 10,000 families are mourning now because they've lost loved ones. It didn't have to be this way. It did not have to be this way. And that's the most heartbreaking part. So now let's talk a little bit about money. Selena, I'm going to come to you. You're running for the House, the Texas legislature. Money is a big part of what you do. Money is going to be a big part of how we get through the COVID crisis. Without getting into all the details, you guys know me. I'm a CPA. I spend an awful lot of time thinking and worrying about how are we going to fund public education. Now we have to worry about how we're going to fund COVID. And there's a lot of money coming from the federal government. And I believe that there will continue to be a lot of money coming from the federal government. We've had two tranches that come from the federal government. One, roughly $1 billion to help our schools prepare to open. Another $8 billion to help cities and counties, smaller counties. We'll talk about that another time. Let's talk about that $1 billion that's come into the state to help schools get ready. And we're talking about plexiglass, PPE, computers, broadband, counseling. I mean, I'm not an expert, but you just can imagine the cost that school districts are going to face. And we have $1 billion for that purpose. Now, why aren't we spending that money? And why? We're spending a little bit of it, but school's going to start, and we have spent very little of it. And we're also being told that to the extent any school district uses those funds, they're going to be docked support from the state. I mean, this is awful. And so as a soon-to-be Texas legislator, I'd love to have you comment on whether or not we're doing this right, transparently, and in a way that fosters accountability.
Absolutely. And I think, you hit it on the head in your earlier, address to how we're approaching this issue. There is a serious lack of transparency when it comes to how we're ensuring that our school districts are receiving the resources they need. And look, I think the bottom line is kids don't vote, right? So when it comes down to it, they're the ones making the decisions, which, hardly lands in the position of our governor. He's not concerned about the individuals who are going to be most affected. And these are the students in our schools, right? 1 of every 10 public school child in our country is right here in Texas. And as much as, to Ms. Mathis's point earlier, as much as it varies from county to county, how many students we have, how many cases we have, what isn't varying is the number of cases we're seeing. We're hovering at about 15% transmission rate here in Bexar County. And while that might not be as much as we're seeing in other counties, it is still not at the level of safety that is needed. And until we get to that point, we need to follow a comprehensive plan that ensures that every child, every teacher, every school has the resources they need to do distance learning. And when we're able to fund things like contact tracing without using a buddy-buddy system of awarding those contracts, and we're able to ensure that testing is adequate, not being reduced at the same time that we're seeing rates poised to increase, then we can start to see an opportunity where maybe, just maybe, we'll get to have kids back in our schools in a safe environment. But that safe environment looks very different too. It's plexiglass, yes, but it's new ventilation systems. It's PPE for every student, every teacher, every custodian, every single day if they need it. And we don't have the supplies for that. We don't have the funds for that. And the fact that we aren't allocating those funds in that way shows me exactly where our state's priorities lie.
Well, thank you, Selena. I can tell you that I get a lot of phone calls from a lot of folks that want to know where that $1 billion is. And I hear the most amazing stories about where they think it's going. And I'm not going to traffic in rumors, but I can tell you that there are a lot of them, and there's real concern about whether or not the money is going to the right place. And I'm hoping that Governor Abbott and others are listening. Well, in my opinion, what they need to do is they need to form some component of the legislature to have public hearings so that we can inspect their logic and inspect compliance with the law and so forth. Now, I want to pivot because there's a linkage always to public education in minority communities, particularly now because COVID is disproportionately affecting minority communities. At the same time, we often find that we aren't funding education properly in minority communities, and this is the result of many years of, in my opinion, bad management and misdirection. So we have two problems to solve. Danny, let me come to you. You talk to a lot of folks in the community. Do you think we'll be able to make progress in this next election cycle? We're making headway as Democrats. Do you think we'll make progress in terms of having real representation in federal and state government?
Well, I sure hope so. I think there is definitely some excitement on this particular election. I think a lot of people do realize. I think this pandemic has put in people's faces is drawn out a lot of the issues that you mentioned before about a lot of the structural issues that we've had. It's affected minority communities because those communities have been underfunded. They tend to be under-resourced, and therefore the results are just basically showing in this space like it shows in other spaces. I think that we definitely should. I think there definitely is going to be more enthusiasm, and I think the bigger issue is going to be a matter of making sure that people are able to vote. I think there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of discussion about mail-in ballots and a whole lot of rumors that are not necessarily true. But I think more mail-in ballots should be available. But I think right now I don't think anybody really trusts the post office. I think I see people always fussing about how slow things are moving because of a lot of underfunding, a lot of funding that has been going on with the in that space. So I think there's a lot of concerns. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm, but also a lot of concerns on how this process is going to work. It doesn't like we're going to have this COVID thing wrapped up anytime soon. So we're likely going to be voting during a pandemic. So how does that work? I think we were able to get through the primary, the primary runoffs, and that was just a small segment. But the actual election in November is going to be a lot more people. So I think there's definitely some challenges that we should definitely be looking at on how do we address. But I think the enthusiasm is definitely there to actually do something. I think people are tired. I think people want something to be done. I think people people want their lives back, and I think it should be clear that we need to do something different. And I think so. With regards to the upcoming vote, I think it's going to be a matter of people actually, making sure that people actually are able to get out, and that, that there are any particular hurdles that people are giving with any of this going on are made addressed, and people are able to actually make sure their vote is cast and actually and put in who they want to represent them and to address these issues ideally. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I want to make sure everybody focuses on the plan that Vice President Biden has put forth to open our schools safely devotes an awful lot of real estate, time, and effort, shall we say, in terms of dealing with educational inequality, dealing with the risk inequality as we open our schools as it relates to minority communities. It's something I'm very proud of. So I would urge everybody to look at that plan. It's a great plan. I want to pivot. Probably the last bit of questions has to do with testing. And the first thing I want to say is the way this works is that people are getting tested only when they don't feel good. It's the honor system in schools. We aren't testing children. And you don't know that you're sick. I mean, you don't know that you're a carrier until you feel sick. And a lot of people are never sick. And so I just want the record to reflect that because we do not have a national testing plan, and because testing is not an integral part of opening our schools, and I'm not talking about testing people when they feel bad. I'm talking about testing people in a very scientific and systematic way. Because we are not doing that, and I lay the blame at the feet of our president and our governor, that this is a very, very risky proposition. And it's just a disgrace that we aren't following science. But I also want to talk about testing students in the STAR test. Now, we don't have enough money for plexiglass and PPE and the rest. I don't like testing anyway. We're spending $100 million on a testing company that's really, as somebody said, it's just an autopsy test. It doesn't really help. In fact, I'm hearing from school boards that schools have their own testing that do a good job from a diagnostic standpoint. And yet here we are pumping $100 million into some company for high stakes testing in the middle of a pandemic. We could use that money better. Bridget, how do you feel about testing? And Selena, how do you all feel about testing?
Oh, testing is my pet peeve. I have always thought that there was other ways to measure student success other than the time and the pressure that it puts on our students as well as educators when it comes to our STAR testing in the state of Texas. I really think it's the most unproductive thing that we ever could do for our children, because STAR testing really, if we get down to it, and one of my students had just texted me earlier before we started and said, "We're so proud of you. Remember what you always told us, speak your truth." And so I'm going to speak my truth about testing. We have wasted so much time with testing when we already know that the data shows that minority students or students of color, by the time they enter third grade, if they haven't got that reading level by then, they're going to always be behind. So therefore, that achievement gap that you see on the STAR testing starts when they're there. It starts because they did not have proper pre-K or early childhood education, which the state does not want to fund for that. We could eliminate a lot of our issues if we just make educational needs and educational wants and educational everything equitable among all schools. It is not equitable among all schools. And I'm sitting in a district which is a majority minority district, but that equity still is not there. And so I don't need a STAR test to tell me that my kids or my students are behind the 8 ball by the time they get to a certain level. I need that money to be put in so they can be on an equal playing ground at an early age, so they're not behind the 8 ball when they get to high school. And that's my thoughts on testing. And I know that I was so shocked when the first thing they wanted to tell us, "Oh, but by the way, we don't know when school is going to start, but we're going to have testing this year." Wrong source. Right. Teachers, we spend so much time worried about can we get this kid to pass, instead of just being teachers and teaching them how to become productive individuals, how to make those decisions, how to become productive workers, and find good avenues for them to succeed in college and trade and military sources. And instead of wasting their time, did they pass this test to graduate? Or did they meet this test to get to the 6th grade? Or did they meet this test to go to high school? It's just a waste. And somewhere down the line, I've always thought that someone has some type of money dealing in these tests. And that's why they push it so much. But it's definitely not, to me, not for the benefit of our students at all, especially students of color.
Thank you, Bridget. Selena, I'm going to give you the last word on testing, but you said something I want to comment on. You worry about money. I hope everybody understands that we don't have a state auditor. The Constitution says we need to have a state auditor, but the state auditor quit. John Keel quit 5 years ago and has not been replaced by Governor Abbott and Dan Patrick. Now, how can they possibly assert that they are conservative when they do something so unbelievably fiscally irresponsible as to not replace the state auditor? Selena, last word on testing, and then we're going to throw it open to questions.
I appreciate that. I was a student in our Texas public schools taking these standardized tests in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade. And I remember it was all about make sure you bring your number 2 pencil, have an extra one right by you just in case, and a good book to read when you're finished. And boy, has it changed. My daughter, who would have taken the test this past year, was in 3rd grade, and the sentiment around these tests is so drastically different. It is about high stakes. It is about pressure. It is about anxiety. And it's not just felt by the students, it's felt by the teachers, the administration, and the parents as well. Where all of these funds could go instead, and I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Mathis here, is working towards pre-literacy skills, funding early childhood education, universal pre-K, and also looking at kindergarten as a formal start of our education. We still don't have kindergarten as a mandatory aspect of our public school education. Now, once you register, you are compelled to attend, but it is still not required. And so you have a huge gap of students who may even be entering school as late as 1st grade, and some students who have been receiving early childhood education since the age of 3 or 4 years old. And I can tell you there's a significant gap there. That's a gap that we can fund, a gap that we can close, and a gap that we know how to work with. If only we were to entrust our parents and our teachers and our school administrators with the funds and resources to do so.
Thank you, Selena. Well, I think at this point, we'll throw it open for questions. I'd just like to make one closing remark before we do, and it has to do with if you compare and contrast the 2 presidential candidates. Vice President Biden has a plan. The plan is science-based. The plan is built around accurate and timely communication. The plan is built around investing properly sequentially. The plan is built around dealing with the systemic inequality that affects not only education, but it affects how people are surviving or not surviving, sadly, COVID. His opponent, our incumbent president, has none of the above, nor has he from the beginning, which is why we're going to cross 200,000 dead. And it did not have to be that way. The contrast could not be any more stark. So having unburdened myself with that, why don't we throw it open to questions? And Avi, I think you're going to help direct traffic, right?
I will, yes. And that was very well said, Mike. For any reporter that has a question, please type it into the question and answer box right now. We'll get over to them on a first come, first served basis. So remember, just type them into the question and answer box right now, into the chat box. All right, we have a few populating up here. I'll give it one more minute here. Okay, first question is for Mike Collier from Brad Brooks of Reuters. He says, what are the key things Abbott needs to do to safely open schools?
Well, I think the very first thing, first of all, he should listen to health experts, of which I'm not a health expert. But what I'm going to do is share with you what I read the health experts are saying. First of all, there's a connection between the risk that we're taking and positivity rates on tests. All right. So Abbott told us when we was opening the economy that if we have a positivity rate of 10%, that's dangerous. Positivity rates in parts of the state are approaching 20%. If you have a community with positivity rates of 20%, then it is a very high risk proposition to send people to in-classroom learning. You must follow the Biden plan and control the virus before we put teachers and support staff and children in harm's way. So first of all is to be honest about what that positivity rate is. That's probably the most important thing. Second, we need to have the right dialogue between local health authorities and local school boards. There's no mistaking. And I'm all for local control. I've been very critical of Governor Abbott and his hostility towards local control. I think it's politically motivated. We can talk about issue after issue after issue. And I am for local control as it relates to opening classrooms, but there's an unmistakable political undercurrent. Because I have school boards that are telling me, Mike, I can't do the right thing. I need the health director in my community to stand shoulder to shoulder with me to reassure people that we're doing the right thing. What Governor Abbott has said is that the local health authorities have no say in this, nor does the local county judge. And that makes no sense. When have we ever had a hurricane, for example, where you had the various leaders of the community fighting each other? I mean, this is absurd. It's patently absurd. So the second thing is that he needs to make sure that local health authorities have good information. Third, we need much better communication, and it needs to be driven by facts. And Greg Abbott's credibility is shot. So is President Trump's. I don't want to hear from either one of them. I want to hear from Texas needs an Anthony Fauci. I want to hear from that person so that we have the confidence. I'd like to hear more from Fauci so that we have the confidence. Parents are making life and death decisions as it relates to their children. Teachers are making life and death decisions. Bridget, you and I discussed this earlier. Teachers are retiring because of the uncertainty and the fear. So we need to hear from the experts so that we know what's happening. And then fourth, funding. Let's think about this. I bring up plexiglass because it's the best example I can think of. And when I talk to school board members and administrators, they say plexiglass is expensive and you need that to be able to separate children. Now, who's paying for that? Why isn't it being installed? What direction are children moving in hallways? Can you get them all moving one way so they don't pass each other? How do you manage and monitor the spacing between them? What about PPE and masks? These things aren't happening. And all of it. So, I give Abbott an F. I mean, an absolute F. He's not doing any of those four things. Now, again, I'm not a teacher. I'm not an administrator. I'm not a health expert. I'm just a Texan who's listening and reading and furious at the incompetence and the dishonesty being applied to one of the most important decisions, management challenges that we're going to face in our lifetime. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, agree completely. Next question is for anybody. There are apparently some major supply chain issues in terms of devices for students. The state has allocated funding for devices, but isn't offering any guidance for what to do in terms of while they wait for them to be delivered. What should the state be doing, and why do teachers think Chromebooks are preferred by so many districts over other devices? Anybody want to take that one?
I can certainly say that in the perspective in our district, one of the largest school districts in the state resides in House District 121, and that's Northeast Independent School District. And they have worked very hard to ensure that they have a device for each and every student. But it has been an uphill battle precisely because of the shortage and such a high demand. I don't know. I have to say, I don't know about the preferred use of Chromebook as an element, but I do know that in the time frame from when schools were closed in March until the end of the school year, Google Classroom was a significant tool that was used. I would imagine because that is the same company that there's some alignment that happens with the software and the hardware that perhaps makes it easier and more secure. But I would be speculating here.
Yeah, so I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
You go, ladies first.
Okay. No, as far as a teacher perspective, I really feel like personally, we should have been preparing in March when we first got out of school, when we knew this first thing was happening. The lack of preparation and now trying to get every student with their electronic device, to me, is just no excuse. We should have been having a plan A, B, C for anything that was going to come about. And that was the issue when we first got out in March, that we didn't have, even Fort Worth is still a one-on-one technology-driven school district as far as secondary, but we still had issues as far as hotspots for our students and things like that. We should have been prepared in March for this to happen in September. And the lack of preparation is no excuse from our state and from our nation.
Yeah, and I'll go even further because when we're talking about testing early, basically this year, the sentiments have basically, it seems like this year, all the school districts are trying to go back to normal as far as grading. So, and that includes STAR testing, high stakes testing, all these things that we're requiring of the students. But at the same time, that means either they're going to have to go in person and put themselves and their families at risk, or stay home. And to stay home, for them to stay home, they have to have the technology to be able to do so. And that goes back to some of those issues about some of the disparities in our communities, basically. So the lower income communities that don't have access to these materials, and if the state is not able to fund that and help get those devices and hotspots to them to access it, because most people have access to the internet through their phone, but you can't use your phone to do assignments. really. So things like they're going to need actual Chromebooks and things like that to actually do their assignments to make sure they get them done. So without the state intervening, and I haven't heard, any particular plan where on any level where that's going to happen. I think the only thing I've heard recently was on our local level was our county stepping up and trying to push in there. But I think they need to be working in coordination with the state and the federal level to help try that if possible. I think right now the in-person schools should be. I don't think it should. Since we don't have a plan, I don't think it's a great idea at all. But if it's going to have to happen, I think the fewest amount of students going as possible is the only way to go. And for that to happen, you have to have as many students as possible have access remotely. And since I don't see a plan with that, and schools are already starting, we're kind of already stepping out into it. So, and unfortunately, if what's likely to happen is if all of a sudden we start have a huge uptick in outbreaks, unfortunately, that's going to lead to a lot more death and communities being at risk. So I think we're kind of stepping out into it without much of a plan. So it's not a good look. But I think ultimately there's definitely needs to be funding to make sure that as many students have access to be able to access their work remotely as possible. At this point, that's everybody needs to focus on making sure the students are able to have access to their work and try to make that possible, because ultimately they may end up having to be out of school anyway at some point if we shut down again.
Great.
Hey, Avi, before you go to the next question, it occurred to me, I want to revise and extend my remarks as the 4 things that Abbott should do. You know what I failed to mention? If you look at Joe Biden's plan, you'll find those 4 elements in there. Every one of them.
That's completely true.
That's completely true.
Next question here, actually. Vice President Biden selected Senator Kamala Harris to be his vice presidential pick this week. Do you think she helps in Texas? And why?
Avi, do you want to pick somebody to answer that? Danny wants to go. Go, Danny.
I'll start off.
Go, Danny.
I think she's a great compliment to Vice President Biden on all levels. I think that everybody's been waiting, and I think that I was excited to see the news for a lot of reasons, but I think I think they are going to be a great team. I think that I think they will work well together, and I think that now that we know who the ticket is, I think it's time for Texans are in the process of getting information. So I think she does help him in Texas. I think she's been here a number of times. I remember her coming here during the primaries. I remember her coming here, and there was a lot of enthusiasm around her candidacy anyway. So I think a lot of people are excited. I think that she does help. I think she helps. I don't think that's just Texas. I think she helps in general. I think they're a great complement to each other, and I think that she will be a benefit to his candidacy both here in Texas and nationwide.
Mike, do you want to take it next?
Yeah, I'd love to. I was very enthused, and I know that the Democrats that I speak to are very, very enthused, and I'll tell you why. There's 3 main reasons. First of all, hats off to Joe Biden. I mean, it was the first really, truly consequential decision that he was confronted with, and you watch how he made the decision. He took his time. He wasn't pushed around. He was very thoughtful. He treated people with great respect through the process, and then made his decision, and it was a terrific decision. Second, she's ready to be president. I mean, look at her experience in the Senate, sitting in the Judiciary Committee, sitting in the Intelligence Committee, ran a big operation, the Attorney General in California. She's got a lot of and we say in business, battle scars. She's done a lot, and she's tough, and she's ready. God forbid we get into that situation. She's ready and would be an excellent president. And then finally, to have a woman of color and that perspective, which is so needed at the highest levels of our government, is absolutely thrilling. And I know it's thrilling for me because it's going to make for a much stronger country. And I know that my friends, the Democrats, are totally on board. I think it's going to be very, very good for her and him, and particularly here in Texas.
Selena, you're running on the same ticket as her. Do you want to make some?
I appreciate that. Yeah. I'm proud of the ticket that we have put before us. I think that the work that Senator Harris has done, not only in her capacity as senator, but also as AG and her work as a presidential nominee as well, has shown that she has the gravitas for the position. She has the knowledge to bring forth great support for the policies that we need, and has a vision that is going to give us a strategy that we will need in order to come out of this health crisis, this economic crisis, and all of the concerns that we're realizing, not only because of COVID, but also because of the last 4 years of leadership we've had in the White House. I think that the selection that Vice President Biden has selected is one that we can all stand heartily behind.
Great. Bridget, do you want to close it out?
Yeah. Personally, as a African American woman, I was super stoked. I have been watching her a long time, and I had put my money on her that would be his pick. I think what she brings to the table is the same energy that the African American women in Alabama did for Senator Jones. They came out in numbers and got him elected. I think she is a key to turning Texas blue in far as women of color coming out. We are the mainstay of the Democratic Party. We understand that, we know that, and we know that we're excited about her. She's a woman of integrity, she's smart, she can handle any situation, and just like Mike said earlier, she's ready to step into the presidency at any given time if needed. And so I think she just brings a lot to the table as far as all over. And that's a fantastic ticket. And I'm just can't wait to get out and be more active and more involved because of her being on the ticket.
Great to hear. I know that there are a lot of questions here. We only have time for one more. Last question is, what are the proposed solutions to expand broadband infrastructure in rural communities?
Well, I'm happy to take that.
Yeah.
Unless Danny, Selena, Bridget, one of my secret side jobs is that I've been honored to serve on the Vice President Biden's Economic Policy Council, and there's a large number of academics and executives and folks like me. I often wonder, why am I even on there? But we have focused a lot on rural issues, broadband being one of them. And there are some really wonderful ideas that I don't mind previewing. I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of Vice President Biden, but what I can tell you is that there's an awful lot of really clever ways to do with federal and states working together to rapidly expand broadband in rural Texas. And I know I've got some of my ideas. Other people have told me there's some great places to start, which is, for example, universities. Look at Texas. We've got state universities all over the state, sprinkled all over the state. They can serve as infrastructure hubs and then step out from there so that we bring broadband. There's a number of very clever ways to finance this. We have to learn how to finance infrastructure. And that's the part that I don't want to share publicly because I don't know whether my ideas have been supported or not. But I can tell you that there's no shortage of clever ways to invest in infrastructure. But I know what I can say is there's no question as to the priority from Vice President Biden's perspective. This is one of the reasons why I think he asked me to help him. Because when we talked about what are folks thinking outside of the big cities in the state, there's a handful of things that people really care about: education, healthcare, water infrastructure, and broadband, because broadband affects so much. It affects education. It affects healthcare. We have a huge problem in Texas with hospitals closing and specialists. If you live in Lamesa, Texas, and you want to have a baby, you have to drive to Midland. I mean, that makes no sense. So broadband, and in terms of businesses, starting a business, running a business, in terms of what can be done with the agriculture industry, there's just no limit to the good that comes from investment in broadband. So I wish I could say that my ideas have been endorsed. There's an awful lot of people that are a lot smarter than me that are working on this. In due course, I'm sure that there'll be a lot said by the Biden campaign, but trust that infrastructure and broadband is a very, very high priority for all those things. And I think it goes without saying that the gentleman that he's running against has not done one thing. And we've been talking about broadband infrastructure and water and all sorts of things for a long, long time, and nobody acts. Vice President Biden is an action-oriented person. This will be good.
That's completely true. Does anybody else want to take it?
Yeah, I would just add that, in addition to into investing into broadband as part of our infrastructure, I think one thing that this pandemic has shown us is that access to broadband is also about reconnecting people, right? The isolation that individuals are experiencing is severe. And being able to connect with people, even on things like this, brings a level of normalcy that I think a lot of people are craving. And to be able to invest in that, I think, is significant. It also goes to the point of our e-commerce, opportunities that are out there. I think there are lots of opportunities in order for us to connect to not just individuals who are experiencing isolation, but also to businesses that are looking to thrive outside of their own communities, who have wonderful products and wonderful services that they can provide virtually, if only they had the infrastructure in their communities to do so. We know we've got the greatest people in Texas, the greatest businesses in Texas. There's so many great things about this state. Now there's an opportunity for us to connect with them more.
Thank you. And Danny, did you want to say something too?
I'll just add that, I mean, we need to make the investment is the bottom line. I think that's I can't stress that enough, that we need to do it. And I think this situation like this bring that out, making sure that we are able to make sure that everybody's able to connect, because you don't even have the option if you don't have access to broadband, if you don't have access to connectivity issues. So we need to make sure that we can do it both for this particular this situation. It would definitely be of service, but also long term, like some of the things that Selena was mentioned, that it just connects the rural part of Texas to everybody else. And in Texas, you don't have to go very far to get rural. Even in places like here, where I'm in Houston or the metroplexes, you don't go very far, and you're pretty much off the map really quickly. So I think connecting everybody is especially in a state as huge as Texas is going to be critical for the future. So I think we should definitely look now and figure out how to get it done, so we can make sure that can happen, both for the future and our students right now, to make sure they have access to everything they can. So.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have for right now. I know there are a lot more questions. If you have a question for any of the speakers, please email me at abhi@txdemocrats.org, and I'll get those questions over to the speaker that you have a question for. Again, that's abhi@txdemocrats.org. Besides that, thank you to all of our speakers today. You guys all did great and had some great things that, you brought up some great issues, and it was very resonant to today's what's going on just around the state today. Thank you for all the people who joined us, and that is basically it. Thank you guys very much.